Yes, we are going to get better, but the question is how? Is bigger always better? Is newer better than older? Faster better than just that little bit slower? Well, it's hard to tell, but either way, we are going to learn how to use comparisons in German. And I've got an easy way for you, along with a couple of more advanced options. Grüß Gott, hallo, schönen guten Tag, ich bin Billy Berger und das ist Bausteine 2. Herzlich willkommen. If we want to compare things, then generally we're going to need to know how to use adjectives. And I think by now everybody knows that adjectives in German are just a little bit tricky. Now, we've got some videos on adjectives up here somewhere, but for now, the main thing we need to understand is this. If we're using an adjective before a noun, then we'll need to use some kind of ending. And if we're using it like this, as what's called a predicate adjective, then we don't need any ending at all. We can just use that adjective as we'd find it in the dictionary. And the same goes, of course, for our forms of comparison, because most of the ways that we're going to compare things involve the use of an adjective. So let's start off with what is perhaps the easy way to compare things. Here we just need to follow this pattern. We sandwich the adjective here in the middle and say things like, dieser Hund ist nicht so groß wie dieser Hund. And similarly, dieser Hund ist nicht so alt wie dieser Hund. Or maybe, dieser Flöter ist nicht so lang wie dieser Flöter. And of course, we use a similar structure in English where we would say this dog is not as big or maybe not as old as this one. And because we're using this simplified structure, we don't need to do anything to the adjective. We can just use it as we'd find it in the dictionary. So let's take some examples. If I compare myself to, let's say, Christina, then I could come up with these examples, although of course Christina I don't think would necessarily agree. Sie ist nicht so sympathisch wie ich. Sie ist nicht so freundlich wie ich. Sie ist nicht so musikalisch wie ich. Sie ist nicht so sportlich wie ich. Sie ist nicht so intelligent wie ich. Sie ist nicht so hilfsbereit wie ich. Sie ist nicht so aktiv wie ich. Sie ist nicht so fleißig wie ich. But of course, we can turn it around the other way. If we're thinking about the dogs, we can say that one dog is bigger or older than the other. And this is where, of course, we need to use the true comparison. And as you'll see here, this is also pretty easy. Most of the time, all we need to do is to add an ER onto the end of the adjective. And here, I think it's worth pointing out a couple of traps that English speakers might fall into. We'll always use just that ER ending. It doesn't matter how long the adjective is. So instead of saying, as we might in English, she's more intelligent than me, we'll just add the ER to the end of intelligent and get intelligenter. And while we're at it, you might notice the things we're comparing are in the same case. So we say, sie ist intelligenter als ich, and not she is more intelligent than me. So I can say about my wife, for example, sie ist sympathischer als ich, sie ist freundlicher als ich, sie ist musikalischer als ich, sie ist sportlicher als ich, sie ist intelligenter als ich, sie ist hilfsbereiter als ich, sie ist aktiver als ich, sie ist fleißiger als ich. Of course, it wouldn't be grammar if there weren't a few exceptions. If the comparison is one of those short words with an A, an O, or maybe a U in it, then we're going to have to add some dots, the fabled German umlaut. And we need to pay attention here because a lot of the words we commonly use are actually these sorts of little words. So we'll be forming sentences like these ones. And in each case, you can see that there's at the very least an umlaut. Some words change completely, however, but often these follow a similar pattern in English, where we also say good and then better rather than gooder. Let's look at a couple of examples. I might say, das Boot ist alt, aber das Boot ist älter. Das Haus ist hoch, aber das Haus ist höher. Diese Tankstelle ist sehr nah, aber die Tankstelle ist noch näher. Here I'm using noch much as I might use the word even in English, even closer. Die Jacke ist warm und mir ist auch warm. Die Jacke ist wärmer und mir ist auch wärmer. Alright, so up until now we've avoided using our adjectives before a noun. Mostly I think because we have to remember to put on those annoying adjective endings. But let's take a look at some examples. These are all in the nominative because the thing we're talking about is the subject of our sentence. In each case, we'll use the comparative form that we already know, and then as you can see in these examples, all we do is add on the usual ending that reflects both case, in this case nominative, and the gender of the noun that we're referring to. So since we're using the indefinite articles here, it will be an E on the end if it's feminine, an ES if it's neuter, and the usual ER to signify that the noun is masculine. So as long as you're familiar with the normal adjective endings, then you're not going to have much trouble forming your comparisons in this way. Let's look at a couple of examples just to make sure we're on the right track. Das ist eine Yacht. Das ist aber eine kleinere Yacht. With the E ending because yacht is feminine. Das ist ein großes Kreuz. Das ist aber ein größeres Kreuz. Now you can hear that Kreuz is neuter because of that ES ending. Das ist mein jüngerer Bruder und das ist sein älterer Sohn. And here it's a little bit confusing because we have two ERs on the end. The first is of course the usual comparison and the second is the ER ending that we need for masculine nouns or masculine subjects. Bruder und Sohn. This really only leaves us now with that fancy word, the superlative. This is of course the word we use when we're talking about the biggest, the fastest, the oldest, or indeed the nearest. In German, this is also pretty easy, particularly if we're using it in the predicate form. And here we just need to learn a new structure, a new formula. Mostly what we are going to do is to add this ending to the adjective. Just remembering that many of the adjectives that were irregular in the comparative form are going to be irregular in the superlative form. So here I'm thinking about these ones, for example. So you can see that the different forms of viel, gut and hoch. But let's look at the structure we need to use. Instead of using the word the to talk about the best, the biggest, we're going to use the familiar preposition am. So dieses Buch ist gut, dieses Buch ist besser und das Buch ist am besten. But if we look at these examples, we can see that it's actually mostly a fairly easy structure to use. Let's look at some people. Now, looking at these people, we can say, sie ist am schnellsten. Sie ist am freundlichsten. Sie ist am musikalischsten. Sie ist am sportlichsten. Sie ist am intelligentesten. Sie ist am ältesten. Sie ist am aktivsten. Sie ist am fleißigsten. Of course, in reality, it's always going to be a little bit more complex than we have the time to explain here. So what I recommend is that you check out the examples in your textbook Bausteine 2 and you'll be an expert in no time. Also das war's dann für heute und selbstverständlich auch für dieses Video. Ich wünsche Ihnen eine schöne Woche und weiterhin viel Spaß mit der deutschen Sprache. Und wenn Sie Fragen haben, melden Sie sich einfach. Have a great week, and if you have any questions, just get in touch, drop a comment down below and we'll see you next time. Also auf Wiedersehen und tschüss. Dum, dum, dum. Super Musik.